So looking at the insight practice, and in particular the resting in awareness. So this correlates with the Shinzen Young on his grid, the see back, hear back, feel back, and exploring pure awareness as it is. So if I understand your how you were reflecting on your experience, Kim, the self-inquiry practice. And I think the self-inquiry is definitely something that is present in a lot of traditions. So that asking the who am I, the who is seeing, the who is hearing, who is feeling. And then of course the answer comes back, of course it's me. And then there's the potential hypertrophy, how that may invite in a hypertrophy of thought. And then we're in the narrative stage. And then rather than going deeper into awareness, we're popping up more into the conceptual, getting lost in the conceptual frameworks of self. I remember I was in a monastery in Nepal, and one of the monks was giving a discourse on just awareness and abiding in awareness. And there was this other practitioner, this guy, old dude from the Midwest named Bob. And I think that the monk was just kind of reaching into the bag and taking out these stock Zen anecdotes and such of like, show me the face before you were born. Who were you before your mother and father were born? These types of things. These types of questions or anecdotes that might make you ask or reflect, or supposed to put us in a position or lead us in a direction where we can reflect upon the moment of being born in the moment. How is it this concept, this idea of self is arising in the moment, and to look at that moment of conception. But of course, it's substituting it by drawing upon and referencing a person's parents. And so I remember the guy, Bob, was just getting really, really worried about this. And he's just like, hey, man, this is just really making me unsettled. I have no idea who I am anymore. And he was kind of being pushed towards this existential crisis in a way, which I guess, according to existential thought, is a healthy place. Yeah. To have this crisis of who am I? It asks us to look a little bit beyond, a little bit deeper. And I think that's what you were reporting there about how sometimes there can be a trap in looking at the who am I, that can lead us into conceptual, more surface level thought as opposed to a deeper level of awareness. So going from the conceptual level, who am I, what's going on, into the sensory level of, okay, well, of course it's me, but what is that experience of me in this moment? How is it that me is arising? And if we were to then begin to look at, or really suss out, what is this core experience of I am, then that starts to direct us towards the aggregates. Yeah. So there's the classical Buddhist aggregates, form, consciousness, the mental formations, feel, tone, etc. Then there's the aggregates within the Shinzen tradition of the internal seeing, the imaging process of mind, the internal hearing, or the auditory component of thought, and then the feeling, whether that's pressure on pressure or emotive sensations. And so can we just abide in that sensate experience? And that leads us into literally the Vipassana experience. The more that we can just rest in the sensory activity and just be with the sensory activity and see it clearly for what it is. And then how that can lead us into potentially the fluidity and flow of how one sensation leads into the next sensation. Sensations come into being, pass away from being. And if we're looking clearly at those kind of subcomponents of self and how they just kind of tend to fire and go into remission, come into being, pass away from being, we start to notice that there's just the general fluidity, and there's no constant, solid sense of I am. It's somewhat of a reaction, either when we're out in the world constantly, things are kind of bombarding us, sensory activities bombarding us, interpersonal interaction is bombarding us, and we get a very firm sense of self. But when we put it under the microscope, um, there's no solid, consistent I am. We just see points of sensory activity that's turning on and turning off. And each time that might give us a little bit more of a sense. I look out the window, I see the light. Um, there's something pleasant about that. I feel this kind of subtle joy that goes on. I see this particular wisteria plant that's growing from neighbor A's yard into neighbor's B yard. And the neighbor was on the roof and he was complaining that it was the other neighbor's problem. And I'm reminded that there was like this uh, almost not necessarily an argument, but a disagreement. And then all of a sudden I get a firm sense of self. Now I'm falling into a narrative versus letting go of that, turning the direction back towards, the pleasant purple flowers within the wisteria. Then I'll go back to this warm glow, and then the thoughts are shutting down. So within that, there's this sense of, getting into the senses and enjoying sense of self versus, getting lost into a narrative and a personality view, sense of self, dropping into the senses, sense of self. So, that's going in the right direction by just being able to be more in the sensory experience and noticing how that comes into being. So then if we can take it that step further, rather than asking, maybe we should take that cue of asking, who am I, and put that on the side. And maybe it's more about the turning back. So as you were saying earlier, Kim, when you notice the see, hear, feel, there's the turning back. So there's that metaphor of the arrow. I'm seeing outward. Okay, I'm seeing that flower there. Can I just kind of travel back? What is the aspect of awareness that is actually, individuating into sight? Can I contact that experience? I'm feeling the pleasant hedonic tone there. Can I kind of pull back from the pleasant hedonic tone into what is this awareness in the body that is able to flavor in that way? So by just trying to kind of pull back into that more rudimentary kind of awareness that wants to individuate into seeing, hearing, and feeling, and be able to rest into that. We're traveling down the wire or traveling back down the wire from, these things that are the aggregates of self into just that conscious awareness. And so sometimes I find that just that arrow just traveling back down or that metaphor of the arrow. Okay, have this awareness and I'm seeing outward and I'm hearing outward, but traveling back. Sometimes I find that helpful, but when I get into the who am I, then that tends to pop me out and into the conceptual. So sometimes, the who am I is a nice question to ask, but a lot of times when I talk with people, that tends to kind of take them in the wrong direction, into the conceptual. So maybe, even though it's a self-inquiry practice, more the metaphor of just traveling back the wire into what's that core thing. So it's going back to that adage that the monk was saying to poor Bob in the monastery, who were you before your parents were born? Where does this sense of I am come from, even before what you think is birthing it? Of course, there's a circumstance out there, boom, and that gives me a sense of I am. Well, what was the I am before there was some manifesting of self in a way? So is that starting to take in a little bit? Does that start to talk to what you were hoping to cover today, Kim?
Yes, what I'm getting is actually it's to be aware of that very moment where my mind wants to go into the narrative so that I can kind of stop it and bring it back to the bodily experience.
Yeah, so the bodily experience, and if the mind is starting to, even in the asking the question, who am I? And of course I'm me. Well, that would be like the herein experience. Can you also be aware of, the activity of that arising, and what's the space where those words arise? So this is where also talk about the dovetailing of the shamatha and the vipassana, something about really getting into the cooling effect of the shamatha helps to kind of slow down our experience. Sometimes in Vipassana, there might be this assumption that we need to be so acutely present with every scintilla of sensory information that comes in. It can be rather overwhelming and rather rapid paced. I feel that if we really lean into the shamatha, the cooling, there might be kind of a slowing down. And it's like, okay, there's all this sensory activity. I'm just going to kind of hang out with this one facet of it for a little bit. I'll just kind of be with this one facet and then just kind of allow that to, come into being, pass away from being. So yeah, so within that, who am I? And then there's the want to go into thought. Well, okay, you can choose to kind of go into the body. You can choose to go into the seeing, the hearing, all of that. It just, the pulling back into just that awareness. How's it sit with everybody else? This question of...
Go, Lucia. You go.
Yeah, I think whenever I try to ask myself, or who am I, get into the conceptual as well. So I don't know. I mean, but it doesn't take much for me to run into the conceptual strata. So I definitely kind of bringing the awareness back to kind of the body and sensation is a way out. So yeah, that definitely rings true to my experience as well.
Good. Yeah, it's a common report, and I remember in some of the previous discussions about the awareness, there's some people reported that there's kind of an overlap, or it feels like it kind of directs us into more rest states as well. So kind of this kind of going back, and what that does is we're releasing a lot of the want to manifest, a lot of the want to need to react, to respond. And so there's something about that letting go of the need to respond on a very, very subtle microscopic level, which can be inherently restful. And also some people have commented that there's an overlap in terms of see, hear, or feel space, or just as we're kind of resting in awareness, we can become just increasingly aware of just the vast spaciousness outside of us, and also an attenuation of the boundaries of form. So there can be that spaciousness within as well. So, if we're doing the awareness practice and it feels like it's more kind of like the shamatha rest, then yeah, great, that quality is there. If it feels like there's more of kind of the spaciousness, then great, that quality is there too. They'll dovetail. Yeah, Jonathan, you had something you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I don't want to open a can of worms, but it was just interesting the other day, a disagreement with my wife and I, and how I was defending this ego. I was defending, I felt disrespected. And I was able to sit back in the middle of it as she was talking and going, stop, just, what are you defending? Who is it that you're defending? Because if I'm a series of aggregates, I'm things are fluid. Like my body is fluid, is all water. I was just like, you're defending something that you can't touch, you can't see. And it was just, but I was gonna take my stand. I was gonna win this argument. And it was just the silliest thing to somewhere in there be able to step away and see who was it that I was defending. I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't, and for what? Because my priority is the love that exists between my wife and I. That's first and foremost. The issues are second, because if you stay in love, you can resolve any issue. But first and foremost, it's, I don't want to hurt that individual in any way. That would never be my intention. But how often we say, that wasn't my intention. It wasn't my intention to hurt you. And it was just, holding on to this, who am I? I've always wondered if somebody gave you like a letter and said, by the way, the Buddhists have gotten together and this is who you are. What would you do with it? Like, wow.
The Buddha committee.
The Buddha committee would get together and give you, and this is who you are right here.
Hmm.
This is it right here. It's here. Here we go. Fidelity. And then it opens up and it tells you your available securities and your available funds in your body, who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So what? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It would change the minute I read it. It would change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in the end, it's kind of interesting. It's yeah.
So,
It's one of those questions that always gets me too, and I stop asking. The other day, because I set up, when my mother-in-law stays here, just for her security, I set up a couple of cameras, and she knows they're here. I just listen. If you fall, just any, and I was recording, and I caught myself walking by a couple of times, and I was like, I did this. I went, who is that dude? Who is that guy?
mm,
It was just the funniest thing. I think that's why I don't do selfies.
mm.
I was like, I'm looking at him. Who was that? Is that the individual that used to like be a soccer star? No, I can't be that dude.
Mm.
That guy can barely walk. So it was just interesting to.
Yeah, I like how you're reflecting on that with the disagreement with your wife, because yeah, I mean, so much of the interpersonal problems is that we're defending our ego,
Oh God.
defending the ego's want to expand. So for you in that moment to have this kind of self-inquiry piece drop in, and what it does is it gets you to relinquish your position, and then your responses become automatically more attuned with, well, what's your ultimate real goal and value within this, and to rest more into that. I think that's a great, beautiful expression of the utility of the not self experience. There's so much academic BS arguing about there's a self, there's not a self. And it's just like, no, let's put it in the context. There's a self that was in disagreement with somebody that they love. And there was two options: go with the defending the expansiveness of the self at all costs, even to the detriment of the harmony of the home. And also it's based on a lot of one's personal dukkha and suffering, or disidentify from that one particular position, and then be able to then now have access to your resources of the greater want for love and compassion. I mean, that's the practicality and the utility and the surgical precision of the not self experience. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, Mike, it's funny, but even in the language used, if I say, Mike, when you do that, I can't stand it.
Mm.
Already, I'm attacking yourself. The point that and I've learned to say, when that happens, I feel.
Mm.
So now you notice I'm not attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear when I hear this happen, I feel. It's me. It's how I feel. And I don't want to make you feel bad. If you said to me, listen, when you said something, I feel. It doesn't, I think the Buddha goes to it when it says, in some of when he says, let's say somebody's lying, you don't call them a liar. You just say that act of lying is not good or proper or a noble. So it's the act of lying. You don't say you're a liar.
Mm.
Does that make sense? So
we can now say that there's historical evidence that actually Buddha was the generator of nonviolent communication. Yeah.
But he calls the act is not what's the word I'm looking for? Not noble, but
unskillful.
It's unskillful. So the act is unskillful. Mm-hmm. You don't call the player who did the act unskillful, because now you're attacking the ego. Mm-hmm. So you say that act is unskillful. I choose not to engage in that act. And so
there's all different ways that we can kind of practice the non-instigation of our own egoic response and the non-triggering from others. Yeah.
Right.
If we can just kind of, if we're resting in this awareness piece, just be aware of how that can trigger kind of a defensive self in somebody else, trigger our own defensive selves. There's something about, how that can then ripple out into right speech.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for those reflections.
Yeah.
I'd like to make sure we have sufficient time to sit. So how about we go into some self-inquiry theme. So allow yourself to come to a comfortable upright position. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. We'll be working with some self-inquiry practice today. You can start off with a few minutes of shamatha, simple contact with breath. So anchoring your attention to a part of the body that's actively engaged in breathing. Really allowing yourself to attune to the pleasant qualities of breath, the gladdening as well as balancing qualities, properties of breath. Being aware of any subtle potential for striving in breath. Just trying to lean into whatever is pleasant, even if it's subtle, fleeting. Just allow yourself to appreciate the subtle, pleasant abiding in breath. So as we are engaged in breath, we can open up this peripheral awareness. to include this full feeling body. There's the various sensations that rise and fall in the body. Some pressure on pressure, some are more emotive in nature. And just step back and just allow. Be aware of the rising and passing of sensations in the body. And as well, the thoughts tend to do their thing. Images that the mind's eye generates, fantasy, planning, daydream, all the images that we see, the general seeing space of the mind. Internal talk arises, the conversations and commentaries in the hearing space of the mind. Most people reporting seeing space is somewhere around the eyes, the forehead, the hearing space between the ears. So just allow your peripheral awareness to extend into the seeing, hearing, and feeling experience. And as we're soaking into this sensory experience, these are the subcomponents of self in a way. The body, mind. Getting into the Vipassana, the inside is we're just hanging out and observing the sensory experience. One moment an image arises in see space and passes away. Maybe as it does so, it also fuels words that we hear in hear space, generates an emotive response in the body, and emotion comes up. If we don't engage any of it, we just allow it to just rise and pass. You see there's this fluidity, turning on and off of see, hear, and feel. Our job is just step back and just allow the process to happen without engaging in any of the conceptual content, but resting into the sensory activity. So you can either just be aware of this activity, or if you'd like to label, see, hear, or feel. Whenever the activity arises, that helps sustain the continuity of awareness, of mindful attention. And so, even in this just simple observation of the rise and fall of sea here, feel it's inclining us towards this observing state. Feel free to just slow down your process, slow down your sampling rate. When you contact an activity of seeing, hearing, or feeling, you might get this subtle kind of sense of an arrow pointing outward in a way. So that attention is directing from a source outward towards an image you connect with or a sensation that you feel. Can you even pull back from that activity into contacting the sense of awareness? As I'm aware of this plane moving overhead, I'm hearing it out there. But in this line of contact of sound, I'm also bringing my awareness back down in. What is this flavor of awareness that wants to reach out to hear? Can I contact that and rest in that? An image arises in my mind. Can I walk back down that line, that arrow that's reaching out to the image, into this bare awareness that wants to individuate into seeing? So it's a subtle shift, but it's in the same direction of just pulling back away from the content. And in a way, we're pulling back away from being the observer, looking at this activity of observing. Just the awareness that wants to reach out and connect with these sensory activities. So sometimes we kind of pop up more into the conceptual and fuel and engage in thinking. And if we pull back a little bit to just observing, pulling back from the content of the see, hear, feel, and just observe the activity of see, hear, feel. And we notice it rises and falls. And we're becoming ingratiated in the sensory activity. The more that we can sustain that awareness and that contact, we really become ingratiated in the fluidity of that activity. And then we can even pull back from that rather than outwardly watching that. We're turning the intention more inward towards that faculty of awareness that can notice, perceive, make contact. Okay, at ease. So can you still be in contact with just resting in awareness, with eyes open and having another level of taking in sensory information? So what did you notice? What did you observe? What was salient for you this morning? Maybe from some people that we haven't heard from this morning, if they take priority in wanting to share.
I do actually have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes I do this practice and it kind of opens up into kind of open awareness. And sometimes it feels like I do this practice and I'm just sort of like re-ifying the self in a way, because it seems like I'm turning the attention towards the centralized spot in my head, and it feels like the awareness is sort of beaming out from this area in my skull. And it just feels like maybe I'm I'm doing it wrong, because it seems like, once I try to look at it, it's like, well, the thing that's making it feel like the self is that I'm also getting some sensory input from the body, but then it feels like awareness with sensory input from the body is self. So I'm also almost like selfing more while looking at or beaming attention out and in. So I don't know. Sometimes I struggle with that aspect of feeling more like a solid self when I look back.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a excellent point, and a good question. Part of me wonders if we can just kind of remain on that sensory level. If you're just kind of centralizing this awareness here. Sometimes it's very spacious, but sometimes it's contractive. That can also be a natural expression, as any sensate activity has an expansive and a contractive quality. Sometimes you might be resting primarily in the expansive aspect of it. Sometimes you might become a little more predominantly aware of the contractive element. If you feel that you're stuck there, and in a way it is re-ifying a self, also kind of curious about that, but I'll pin that for a moment. Maybe you can look at what are the boundaries of that. If you feel like, oh, I'm kind of stuck here in the head there, well, what are the boundaries of this awareness then? Does it literally just kind of bounce up against the skull? Where is the boundaries? Can you pour your kind of awareness around that, maybe kind of scan around that, and maybe it might become a little bit looser. Maybe it might be about intentionally opening up, exploring kind of the expansiveness. Maybe you can tap into a little bit more of working in spaciousness. If it feels like it's too much of re-ifying itself. So as I was saying earlier, there's kind of this overlap of the self-inquiry with kind of the rest states, as well as the space, exploring space. So, as you're kind of abiding in awareness, you can look at the rest states and the stabilized attention aspect of it. But if you feel like it's a little bit too much contractive, then you can intentionally shift your awareness into more of a spaciousness. Or you could look at the perceived boundary that the awareness doesn't want to cross. What's the nature of that boundary there? Can you feel into that? And there might be like some subtle trappings of expansion, contraction held in that might begin to dissolve. And I'm also curious about, usually when there's a self, the predominant thing that comes up is one of the hindrances. So we were talking about the Buddhist personality types yesterday. So it's interesting if it's like, oh, I'm kind of dissolving, the egoic stance is dissolving and I'm able to rest in just awareness. Then that ego is like, no, I want to come back. Let's put doubt in the front of the charge, and that'll just break through all of this. And then boom, oh, doubt is here, and here I am. I'm wondering if there's also a little bit of that can happen.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I have to say, resting in the sensory experience can be very activating for me. It often feels much more soothing, even though it ultimately isn't. It should just be in the conceptual sort of domain. So sometimes being in the sensory experience is scary or uncomfortable, and I have to be like, no, you can. It's cool to be here, but so I'm not surprised that the self will just want to come and assert itself.
Sometimes, so if I heard you correctly, sometimes it's more soothing to be in the conceptual self, in the conceptual area of just kind of hanging out and just kind of being in the fantasy planning daydream is self-soothing. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And that's so much of the reason that we hang out in the default mode network so much is because there can be there's the potential for a pleasant and entertaining reification of self there. So when you go into the sensory level and you're just kind of abiding and see, hear, feel, and the flow of it, that can feel, by contrast, unpleasant or
Sometimes, yeah, or often.
unsafe. Did you say that term?
Yeah, yeah.
What is the feeling of not safe that's happens for you there?
Well, I think it's maybe like a groundlessness.
Groundlessness. Yeah.
Yeah, because there is some flow. You observe the coming and going of sensory input. So it's like, yeah, I think there's a sense of the bottom falls out somehow.
Yeah. The bottom falls out. So that's understandably can be a very unsettling place. I mean, so as I was saying earlier, yeah, there's when we're out in the world and we're dealing with the conceptual self in the conceptual world, there's a solid sense of I am, and there's a comfort in that. And then when we get into the sensory level, we see, yeah, there's no real solid self. It's just all kind of fluidity of activity. Sometimes that can be a relieving experience, and sometimes that can be unnerving because the way that you put it, there's a groundlessness. So if you're resting into the sensory level and it's just, wow, this is all just kind of sensory flow and there's no real solid sense of I am occurring, there's groundless. Can you then, rather than popping back into the the conceptual, going back into fantasy, planning, daydream, can you lean a little bit into the shamatha? Can you lean a little bit into the metta?
Well, metta helps. Shamatha is not always, but metta definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so metta is a resource that's available
Yeah.
for you. Okay, so then maybe do that. Maybe then put the Vipassana insight in kind of the background, and then the foreground just shift into a metta practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so really. And what sort of metta contact or jug handle would be available for you to reach to when you're in that state? The kindness, the compassion, maybe the compassion for the part of you that's feeling the fear.
Yeah, compassion. It's a good one. Yeah. Which also has like a re-ifying quality sometimes of the self a little bit. It's kind of like but I mean.
You made that little hugging motion, like there's a little kind of securing, kind of hugging, soothing. Well, maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's okay. Is equanimity available at all?
Sometimes.
Okay. But the compassion is more.
Yeah.
Okay.
The equanimity is equally groundless because it's like, kind of has this. Yeah.
This is very true. The equanimity, yeah. So maybe the compassion.
Yeah.
Maybe just kind of pause the insight and go into the self-compassion piece for a bit. And I mean, it might be a little bit re-ifying, but maybe, if that's what you need is to re-ify, then that's what you need.
Okay.
And that's okay. But I think ultimately it's about, being able to take some of that self-compassion into the sensory experience as well. So that there can be kind of a resting of like, okay, actually this is a safe place too.
Yeah.
But, I think it's important for you to feel good and safe and know that at any time, bearing down, lightening up, what is it that you need in the moment? So, yeah, good.
Thank you.
So resting in awareness, sometimes it's spacious and it's pleasant. Sometimes it's contractive and then it reifies itself. And then sometimes really getting into that sensory experience can be very unnerving. So then press a pause, go into self-compassion. Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Lucia, Pema Chodron talks a lot about the groundlessness in all her books or all her talks. And I had this image as you were talking that the groundlessness is like being on a big wave and the surfboard is the equanimity. Because that's all you got right there. And then you just got to flow with because it's always moving. The ground is always moving, it feels like.
I know, it can be scary.
Yeah.
But I might take up surfing soon, so who knows?
I know, so do I, right? So do I.
The post-COVID to-do list.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody, we've reached the top of the hour, so thank you very much for
Thank you, Michael.
Attention. Just listen to the sound of the bell. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you all tomorrow.
See you all tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye-bye.